The night Vivienne Mercer's husband replaced her with another woman in front of 300 billionaires, she didn't cry, she vanished. 4 years later, she walked back into that same ballroom wearing a different name, a darker past, and the kind of patience that destroys empires without firing a single shot. If you want to see how a woman rebuilt herself from absolute humiliation into something her ex-husband never saw coming, stay until the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me tell you how it really began. The chandeliers above the Ashcroft Estate ballroom threw light like broken glass across 300 faces that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Vivienne Mercer stood near the center of it all, champagne flute untouched in her hand, watching her husband work the room the way he always did, smooth, magnetic, untouchable. Damien Ashcroft didn't just own the company, he owned the oxygen in every conversation. She'd built half of it with him. The offshore accounts, the shell corporations that made their expansion possible, the backroom deals with investors who preferred their money anonymous and their loyalty expensive. 11 years of marriage, 11 years of being the woman behind the empire, the one who knew where everybody was buried because she'd helped dig half the graves. Bah. Tonight was supposed to be their anniversary celebration. The invitation had said as much. Black tie, open bar, a speech about partnership and legacy. Vivienne adjusted the diamond necklace at her throat, a gift from Damien 3 years ago, back when he still pretended to see her as more than infrastructure. She'd chosen a gown the color of midnight, sleek and unforgiving, because she knew how to dress for these people. Senators who smiled with too many teeth, investors who measured you in quarterly projections, socialites who could smell weakness like sharks smelled blood. Damien stepped onto the platform at the front of the room, microphone in hand, and the crowd quieted with the kind of obedience reserved for men who controlled billions. Vivienne felt her pulse settle into something steady. She'd heard him rehearse this speech twice. She knew the beats, the gratitude, the humility that wasn't humble. The part where he'd thank her publicly and she'd smile like she was supposed to. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Damien began, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd learned charisma from a handbook. 11 years ago, I made a choice that changed my life. Vivienne's chest tightened. She could see Celeste Laurent standing near the edge of the platform now, just off to Damien's left. Stunning in the way that magazine covers were stunning, angular, polished, the kind of beauty that required a team. Celeste was his new chief strategist, hired 6 months ago after a merger Vivienne had orchestrated but never got credit for. "I believed in partnership," Damien continued. "I believed that building something great required more than just one person's vision." The crowd murmured approvingly. Vivienne forced herself to breathe. "But partnerships evolve," Damien said, and something in his tone shifted. "And sometimes evolution means making difficult choices." Vivienne's fingers went numb around the champagne glass. "Tonight, I want to introduce you to someone who represents the future of Ashcroft Industries," Damien said, turning toward Celeste with a smile that looked like it had been focus grouped. "Celeste Laurent will be stepping into a leadership role that reflects both her strategic brilliance and her personal commitment to this company's growth." Celeste stepped forward, radiant under the lights, and Damien reached for her hand. The ballroom went silent in the way that rooms go silent before car crashes. "Celeste and I," Damien said, his voice steady as concrete, "are building a future together, both professionally and personally." Vivienne's heartbeat turned into something animal. She could feel 300 pairs of eyes sliding toward her, hungry for her reaction, waiting to see if she'd crack in public the way people always hoped women would crack. "I want to thank Vivienne," Damien continued, finally looking at her with the kind of distant politeness you'd give a former employee, for everything she contributed during the early years. "But it's time to move forward." The words landed like bullets without the mercy of noise. Vivienne stood there, glass still in hand, and felt something inside her stop breaking and start calcifying. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the champagne or collapse or do any of the things the room expected from a woman being dismantled in public. She walked toward the platform. The crowd parted like she was contagious. Damien's smile faltered for half a second as she took the microphone from his hand without asking. "Thank you, Damien," Vivienne said, her voice carrying across the ballroom with the clarity of someone who'd stopped caring about consequences. "For your honesty." She turned to face the crowd. Senators, investors, socialites who'd smiled at her an hour ago and would forget her name by midnight. "Enjoy the party," she said. Then she set the microphone down, walked off the platform, and headed straight for the coat check without looking back. Her assistant tried to follow. Vivienne waved her off. The valet asked if she needed her car. She shook her head. Outside, the October air bit through the thin fabric of her gown, but she didn't stop walking until she reached the edge of the estate's long driveway where the private cars were parked in neat rows like soldiers. She opened the trunk of Damien's Bentley, still registered in both their names, and pulled out the black leather suitcase she'd packed 3 weeks ago when she first started suspecting. Then she walked. No phone, no wallet, no keys to the penthouse she'd decorated, the office she'd built, the life she'd sacrificed everything to maintain. Just the suitcase and the cold. By dawn, Vivienne Mercer had disappeared. The harbor town didn't have a name anyone remembered. It was the kind of place people drove through on the way to somewhere better. A cluster of buildings slouched against the coast like they were too tired to stand up straight. Faded paint, rusted docks. A bar that doubled as a laundromat because the owner couldn't afford to run 2 businesses. Vivienne rented a room above the laundromat with cash she'd been skimming from household accounts for months. The landlord didn't ask questions. She didn't offer answers. The room smelled like detergent and mildew. One window. A bed that creaked. A bathroom with tiles that had been white sometime in the previous century. She set the suitcase on the floor, sat on the edge of the mattress, and stared at the wall until the sun came up. She didn't cry. Not that first night. Not the second. Not the week after that. She cut her hair in the bathroom mirror with kitchen scissors she bought from the dollar store 3 blocks away. The long, dark waves Damien used to run his fingers through fell into the sink in clumps. When she finished, she looked like someone else. Sharper, harder. A woman no one would recognize in a ballroom full of chandeliers. She burned her gown in the dumpster behind the building and watched the fabric curl into black ash. Then she started rebuilding. The first job was bookkeeping for a shipping company that operated out of a warehouse near the docks. The owner paid under the table, no questions, no tax forms. Vivienne kept the books clean, tracked inventory, and made herself invisible. At night, she went to the public library. It was small, underfunded, with shelves that sagged under the weight of outdated encyclopedias and romance novels no one checked out anymore. But it had internet access and a back corner no one used. She studied. Finance law, offshore banking, corporate fraud, shell corporations, money laundering. The anatomy of how empires were built and how they could be dismantled from the inside out. She reconstructed Damien's entire operation from memory. Every hidden account, every fraudulent partnership, every lie buried under legal paperwork and charity galas. She'd helped build it. She knew where the cracks were, and she started making a list. Months passed. The town stayed cold. Vivienne worked, studied, and became someone named Evelyn Vale, a name she pulled from a gravestone in the cemetery near the edge of town. A woman who died in 1987 at 23, unmarried, no family listed. Evelyn Vale had no credit history, no social media, no past. She was perfect. She met Lucien Moretti on a Tuesday in February, 6 months after she'd vanished. He walked into the shipping warehouse like he owned it, which, as it turned out, he did. Not on paper. Lucien didn't put his name on anything, but the way the dock workers straightened when he entered, the way her boss suddenly became very interested in his coffee, made it clear who actually ran things. Lucien was older, silver hair, sharp suit that didn't belong in a place that smelled like diesel and seawater. Eyes that looked at people the way accountants looked at balance sheets, calculating, patient, indifferent to emotion. He stopped in front of Evelyn's desk. "You're new," he said. 6 months, she replied, not looking up from the invoices she was sorting. "Good with numbers?" "Better than most." "Most isn't a high bar in this business." She finally looked up. His face was lined in the way faces got lined when they'd seen things that didn't make it into polite conversation. Not handsome, but compelling in the way that icebergs were compelling. Most of the danger was underneath. "You need something?" she asked. "An accountant," Lucien said. "Someone who understands how to move money without leaving fingerprints." "Illegal?" "Gray." Gray's just illegal with better lawyers. Lucian's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You interested or not? Evelyn set down her pen. Depends on the pay. Triple what you're making here. And the risk? Manageable. If you're smart. She studied him for a long moment. He didn't flinch, didn't charm, didn't perform the kind of charisma Damien had wielded like a weapon. When do I start? She asked. Now, won't you? Fine. Working for Lucian Moretti was nothing like working for Damien Ashcroft. Damien had built an empire on image, press releases, charity galas, magazine covers that made him look like a visionary instead of a thief. Lucian built his empire in shadows, shipping contracts that moved more than cargo, security firms that provided more than bodyguards, political back channels that ensured laws bent in convenient directions. He never lied about what he was. And that, Evelyn realized, was the most dangerous thing about him. She started small, cleaning up discrepancies in his logistics operation, tracking payments through shell corporations, identifying which employees were skimming and which were just incompetent. Lucian watched her work without micromanaging, without performative praise, without trying to take credit for her solutions. When she exposed a mid-level manager who'd been siphoning funds for 2 years, Lucian fired him on the spot and gave Evelyn his office. You don't trust easily, she said one evening, 3 months into the job. They were alone in his headquarters, a renovated warehouse overlooking the docks, stripped down to steel beams and concrete floors. No warmth, no pretense. Neither do you, Lucian replied, pouring himself a drink. Whiskey. Neat. He didn't offer her one. I have reasons. So do I. He didn't push, didn't ask about her past, didn't perform concern or curiosity, and somehow that made her want to tell him. I used to be someone else, she said quietly. Lucian looked at her over the rim of his glass. Most people in this business used to be someone else. I was married. Was. He replaced me. Publicly. In front of everyone who mattered. Lucien's expression didn't change. You kill him? Not yet. Planning to. Planning to do something worse. Lucian set down his glass. Worse than killing someone is taking away everything that makes them feel alive. Evelyn met his eyes. Exactly. For the first time since she'd met him, Lucian smiled. It wasn't warm, but it was real. You're going to be very good at this, he said. Bam. A year passed. Then another. Evelyn became Lucian's right hand, the person who knew which politicians needed convincing, which business rivals needed eliminating, which operations needed shutting down before they attracted federal attention. She was brutal, efficient, ruthless in ways that made Lucian's other employees nervous. But she never crossed the line into cruelty. She fired people who deserved it. She exposed corruption inside Lucian's own network. She earned loyalty not through fear but through fairness, a concept most people in their world had forgotten existed. Lucian started asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with money. They had dinner once a week, not dates, strategy sessions that happened to involve food. He told her about the shipping routes he'd inherited from his father, the violence he'd witnessed as a kid growing up on docks controlled by men who settled disputes with fists and knives, the way he'd climbed out of that world by being smarter, colder, and more patient than everyone around him. She told him about Damien, the humiliation, the years she'd spent building an empire only to be erased in front of 300 people who'd smiled at her an hour earlier. You miss him? Lucian asked one night. No, Evelyn said. I miss the version of myself that didn't know better. That version's dead. I know. Good, Lucian said. Dead things don't come back, but they make excellent fertilizer. Evelyn laughed, sharp, bitter, the first real laugh she'd managed in 2 years. Lucian reached across the table and rested his hand over hers. Not romantic, not possessive, just solid. When you're ready, he said quietly, we'll go back. Back? To destroy him. Evelyn's throat tightened. Why would you help me? Lucian's eyes were steady. Because people like Damien Ashcroft think the world belongs to them, and I'm tired of letting them believe it. 3.5 years after Vivienne Mercer disappeared, Damien Ashcroft's name came up at a charity auction Lucian was attending in the city. Evelyn wasn't there. She was home. Home being the cliffside house Lucian had bought 2 years ago, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean and no neighbors for miles. Lucian called her from the auction. "Your ex-husband just donated $1 million to a children's hospital," he said. "Publicity stunt," Evelyn replied, stirring pasta on the stove. "He does it every year, tax write-off disguised as generosity." "They're giving him an award." Evelyn's hand stilled. "Humanitarian of the Year," Lucian continued. "Black tie gala, 3 months from now." Evelyn turned off the stove. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark kitchen window. A woman who looked nothing like the one who'd walked out of that ballroom 4 years ago. "I want to go," she said quietly. "To the gala?" "Home. I want to go home." There was a pause. Then Lucian's voice, low and certain. "Then we go home." Evelyn closed her eyes. "He's going to see me. That's the point. He'll try to destroy me again." "He'll try," Lucian agreed. "But this time, you're not standing there alone." Evelyn opened her eyes and stared out at the dark ocean, at the waves that never stopped breaking against the rocks below. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Let's go back." And for the first time in nearly 4 years, Vivienne Mercer, the woman who'd been erased in front of everyone who mattered, decided to become visible again. But not as the woman Damien had humiliated, as the woman who would erase him instead. The return wasn't sudden, it was surgical. Lucienne and Evelyn spent 3 weeks in a hotel suite downtown, 20 blocks from the Ashcroft Tower, close enough to see the building's glass facade catch the morning light like a middle finger pointed at the sky. The suite had 2 bedrooms, a living room with leather furniture no one ever sat on, and a view of the financial district that reminded Evelyn of everything she used to be part of. She stood at the window on their first morning back, coffee going cold in her hand, watching the traffic crawl through the streets below. Lucienne was on the phone in the other room, his voice a low murmur she couldn't make out. She didn't need to. She knew what he was doing, activating the network. Lucian's world operated on favors, debts, and information that moved through back channels most people didn't know existed. Lawyers who owed him, bankers who feared him, politicians who needed him. He'd spent the last month making calls, sending messages, arranging meetings that would never appear on any official calendar. The plan was simple in theory. Dismantle Damien Ashcroft's empire piece by piece without ever touching him directly. No lawsuits filed under their names, no public accusations, no dramatic confrontations that would give him a chance to spin the narrative. Just pressure, applied slowly, from every direction, until the entire structure collapsed inward. Evelyn had mapped out every weak point during her years in the harbor town. She knew which investors were nervous, which partnerships were built on lies, which offshore accounts had been funded with money that couldn't survive scrutiny. Damien had built an empire on image and charm, but image cracked under pressure, and charm meant nothing to auditors. Lucian ended his call and walked into the living room, buttoning his shirt cuffs with the kind of precision that made every movement look like strategy. 3 meetings today, he said, 1 with a federal prosecutor, 1 with the senior partner at Damien's primary law firm, 1 with the CEO of Montrose Capital. Evelyn turned from the window. Montrose is his biggest investor. Not for long. You told them? I asked questions, Lucian said, pouring himself coffee. The kind of questions that make people nervous, the kind that make them call their accountants at midnight. Evelyn set her cup down on the window ledge. He's going to know someone's targeting him. He already knows. He just doesn't know who. And when he finds out it's me, Lucian looked at her with the kind of calm that came from decades of not flinching. Then he'll understand exactly how badly he miscalculated. The first crack appeared in Damien's empire on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after they'd returned. Evelyn was in the hotel suite when Lucian's associate, a thin man named Garrett, who looked like an accountant but moved like someone who'd spent time in places accountants didn't survive, arrived with a folder full of documents. Montrose Capital pulled out, Garrett said, dropping the folder on the coffee table. Withdrew their entire position this morning, $30 million, no explanation. Evelyn picked up the folder and flipped through the pages. Legal notices, withdrawal confirmations, a terse email from Montrose's CEO declining to renew their partnership agreement. "That's not enough to kill him," she said. "It's enough to make the others nervous," Lucien replied. He was standing near the window, hands in his pockets, watching the street below like he was waiting for something specific to happen. Investors are herd animals. One panics, the rest follow. Garrett nodded. "There's more. 2 of his offshore accounts got flagged by banking regulators. Nothing formal yet, but the kind of flag that makes auditors start asking questions." Evelyn's chest tightened. "Which accounts?" "The Cayman setup and the Singapore Trust." She'd structured both of those accounts herself, back when she was still Vivienne Mercer, back when she believed she and Damien were building something together. The money in those accounts wasn't clean, it never had been, but it was buried under enough legal paperwork to survive casual scrutiny, but not serious scrutiny, not the kind that came with subpoenas and federal investigators. "How long before it becomes public?" she asked. 3 months, Garrett said. Maybe 6 if he's got good lawyers." "He's got excellent lawyers," Evelyn said quietly. Lucien turned from the window. "Had excellent lawyers. His lead counsel resigned yesterday." Evelyn looked up sharply. "Marcus Hale took a position with a firm in London, left the country this morning." She felt something cold settle in her stomach. Marcus Hale didn't run. He was the kind of lawyer who thrived on impossible cases, the kind who saw legal battles as performance art. If Marcus was running, it meant he'd seen something that scared him. "What did you tell him?" Evelyn asked. Lucien's expression didn't change. "I told him the truth, that his client's empire was built on fraud, money laundering, and enough offshore violations to keep federal prosecutors employed for years, and that when the investigation started, everyone connected to Damien Ashcroft was going to get pulled into the blast radius." "And he believed you?" "I showed him the evidence." Evelyn stood up. "What evidence?" Lucien walked over to the desk in the corner and pulled out another folder. Thicker, heavier, the kind of folder that ended careers. "Everything you gave me," he said, handing it to her. "Every account, every fraudulent deal, every hidden partnership. I had my people spend the last 6 months building a case that even Damien's best lawyers couldn't defend." Evelyn opened the folder and felt her hands start shaking. It was all there. Every lie she'd helped bury, every crime she'd been complicit in, every piece of the empire she'd built alongside Damien, now catalogued with the kind of precision that destroyed lives. "You were going to use this without telling me?" Her voice came out flat, dangerous. Lucien met her eyes without flinching. "I was going to use this to protect you. If you're exposed as the architect behind those accounts, you go down with him." "So you thought you'd just handle it yourself?" "I thought I'd make sure you had a choice," Lucien said, his voice steady. "You wanted revenge. I'm giving it to you, but I'm also making sure it doesn't destroy you in the process." Evelyn stared at him. The folder felt heavy in her hands, like it weighed more than paper should weigh. "You should have told me," she said. "I'm telling you now." "That's not the same thing." Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "No, it's not." She wanted to scream at him, wanted to throw the folder across the room, wanted to walk out of the suite and disappear the way she disappeared 4 years ago. But she didn't. Because standing there, looking at the evidence of everything she'd been part of, she realized something worse than anger. She realized she didn't know if she could trust the man she'd spent the last 3 years building a life with. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat in the bedroom with the door closed, going through the folder page by page, reading the annotations Lucien's people had added to her original notes. They'd done good work. Thorough, methodical, the kind of work that would hold up in court. But they'd also included things she hadn't given them. Bank statements from accounts she didn't know existed, wire transfers to shell corporations she'd never heard of, dates that didn't match her timeline. Someone had been adding to Damien's operation after she'd left, and whoever it was had been sloppy. She found Lucien in the living room just after 2 in the morning. He was sitting in one of the leather chairs, laptop open on the coffee table, reading something that made his jaw tighten. "Who else had access to Damien's network?" she asked without preamble. Lucien looked up. "What?" "These accounts." She dropped the folder on the table. "Half of them weren't active when I left. Someone else has been managing his offshore operations." Lucien closed his laptop. "Celeste." The name landed like broken glass. Evelyn sat down on the couch. She's not just his new wife, she's his new architect. Looks that way. How long have you known? 2 weeks? And you didn't think I should know that the woman who replaced me is now doing the same job I used to do? Lucian's expression was unreadable. I didn't want you to feel like you'd been replaced professionally as well as personally. Evelyn laughed, sharp, bitter, the kind of sound that came out when words failed. That's exactly what happened, Lucian. I was replaced, in every way that mattered. You're not her, Lucian said quietly. No, I'm worse, because I'm the one who taught him how to build the system she's using now. She stood up, pacing the length of the living room like a caged animal looking for a way out. If Celeste is managing those accounts, Evelyn said, thinking out loud, then she's seen the same vulnerabilities I saw, which means she knows someone's targeting them. Good, Lucian said. No, not good. Evelyn stopped pacing. If she knows, she'll warn Damien, and if Damien knows someone's coming for him, he'll start covering his tracks. Let him try, Lucian said. We're 3 moves ahead. You're underestimating him. No, you're overestimating him because you still remember him as the man you married. But that man never existed. He was always this. You just didn't want to see it. The words hit harder than they should have. Evelyn turned away, staring at the window, at the city lights blurring through the glass. You don't know what it's like, she said quietly, to realize you gave years of your life to someone who saw you as disposable. Lucian stood up and crossed the room. He stopped behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him but not touching. You're right, he said. I don't know what that's like, but I know what it's like to build something with blood and watch it turn into a thing you don't recognize anymore. And I know what it's like to realize you can't fix it. You can only burn it down and start over. Evelyn closed her eyes. I don't want to burn it down. I want him to feel what I felt. He will. You don't know that. Yes, Lucian said, his voice low and certain. I do. Because men like Damien Ashcroft don't know how to lose, and when they finally do, it destroys them in ways that death never could. The second crack came 5 days later. Evelyn was having breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Coffee, toast she wasn't eating, a newspaper she wasn't reading, when her phone buzzed with a message from Garrett. Ashcroft Industries lost 3 major contracts this morning. No official explanation. Client cited strategic realignment. She read the message twice. Then she paid for her breakfast and went back upstairs. Lucien was on the phone when she walked in, his tone flat and businesslike. He ended the call when he saw her face. You saw the news, he said. 3 contracts in one morning isn't a coincidence. No, it's pressure. It's too fast, Evelyn said, setting her phone on the table. If you push too hard, he'll realize it's coordinated. And if he realizes that, he'll start fighting back. Let him fight, Lucien said. We're ready. Are we? Lucien walked over to her, and for the first time since they'd come back to the city, she saw something in his face that looked almost like doubt. You're having second thoughts, he said quietly. I'm having first thoughts, Evelyn replied, about what happens after we destroy him, about what that makes us. It makes us people who don't let other people erase them. It makes us the same as him. Lucien's jaw tightened. No, it doesn't, because when we're finished, we're going to walk away. Damien never walked away from anything in his life. That's the difference. Evelyn wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that revenge had clean edges, that justice could be surgical, that destroying someone who destroyed you didn't leave scars on your own hands. But she knew better. She'd spent 3 years watching Lucien operate. She'd seen the way his world worked, the violence that stayed hidden behind legal paperwork and polite conversations, the people who disappeared when they became inconvenient, the moral compromises that started small and grew until you couldn't remember where the line used to be. What if I told you I wanted to stop? She asked. Lucien was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'd stop. Just like that? Just like that. Even after everything we've set in motion? Even then. Evelyn searched his face for the lie, for the manipulation, for the performance of sincerity that men like Damien wore like cologne. But Lucien's face was just tired, lined, real. I'm not him, he said quietly, reading her expression. I'm a lot of things. Most of them not good. But I'm not him. I don't own you. I don't control you. And if you want to walk away from this, we walk away. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. Not relief, not love. Something rawer, something that tasted like honesty. I don't want to walk away, she said. Then we keep going. But I need to know you're doing this for the right reasons. There are no right reasons for what we're doing, Lucien said. There are only necessary ones. The Belmont Foundation Gala was scheduled for the third Saturday in November. Black tie, open bar. 500 people who mattered in the kind of circles where mattering meant having enough money to pretend morality was optional. Damien was being honored for his philanthropy. A decade of donations to children's hospitals, cancer research, literacy programs in underserved communities. The kind of giving that looked beautiful in press releases and tax returns. Evelyn and Lucien received their invitations 3 weeks before the event. Not because they'd been invited, because Lucien had purchased a table for $50,000 under the name of one of his shell corporations. The foundation didn't ask questions. Money was money. And $50,000 bought you access to people who usually required appointments months in advance. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror in the hotel suite, watching the seamstress adjust the hem of the gown she'd chosen for the gala. Deep crimson, sleek, the kind of dress that looked like a weapon wrapped in silk. You're sure about this, Lucien said from the doorway. It wasn't a question. No, Evelyn replied, but I'm doing it anyway. The seamstress finished pinning the hem and stepped back. Evelyn turned slowly, watching her reflection shift and settle. She looked nothing like Vivienne Mercer, and that was the point. What happens when he sees me? She asked. Lucien walked into the room and stood behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. He'll panic, Lucien said. Men like Damien always panic when they realize the past isn't as buried as they thought it was. And then? Then we watch him unravel. Evelyn took a breath. The dress fit perfectly. The woman in the mirror looked calm, composed, dangerous in the way that scalpels were dangerous. What if he tries to hurt me again? She asked quietly. Lucien's reflection didn't smile. Then he'll learn that the woman he hurt doesn't exist anymore, and the woman standing in her place is the last person he should have underestimated. The night before the gala, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the city hum outside the window, feeling the weight of 4 years pressing down on her chest like concrete. At 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep and walked into the living room. Lucien was already awake, sitting on the couch with a glass of whiskey and an expression that looked like he was doing math in his head. Can't sleep either? Evelyn asked. Haven't slept well in 20 years, Lucien replied. You get used to it. She sat down next to him. He handed her the glass without asking if she wanted it. She took a sip, sharp, burning, grounding. Tell me something true, she said. Lucien looked at her. About what? About you. About why you're really helping me. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, because I spent the first half of my life building things that hurt people, and I'm trying to spend the second half building things that don't. This is going to hurt Damien. Damien hurt you first. That doesn't make it right. No, Lucien agreed, but it makes it fair. Evelyn leaned back against the couch. Do you ever regret the things you've done? Every day. Then why keep doing them? Lucien took the glass back from her and drained it. Because regret doesn't undo damage. It just teaches you to aim better next time. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Underneath the control, underneath the precision, underneath the calm that made him seem untouchable, Lucien Moretti was exhausted. Not physically tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying weight for so long you forgot what it felt like to set it down. What happens after tomorrow? She asked. After tomorrow, Damien Ashcroft stops being the villain in your story, Lucien said, and you get to figure out who you are when you're not defined by what he took from you. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. What if I don't know who that person is anymore? Lucien turned to face her fully. Then we figure it out together. And for the first time since she'd walked out of that ballroom 4 years ago, Evelyn let herself believe that maybe, she wasn't alone in this. The Belmont Foundation Gala took place in the Grand Ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel, a sprawling Art Deco monument to old money and older power. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, gold trim on everything that didn't move. Evelyn and Lucien arrived exactly 17 minutes after the event started, not early enough to blend in, not late enough to draw attention. Right on time to be noticed without being obvious. Lucien wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars, but somehow made him look like he'd rather be anywhere else. Evelyn wore the crimson gown, her hair pulled back in a way that made her cheekbones look sharp enough to cut. They walked into the ballroom together, and the air shifted. Not dramatically, not like a movie, but the way air shifts when a predator enters a room full of prey, subtle, instinctive, undeniable. People turned, conversations paused, eyes tracked them across the floor. Evelyn felt her pulse kick up, felt the old fear trying to claw its way back into her chest, felt the urge to run, to hide, to disappear the way she'd disappeared 4 years ago. But she didn't. She kept walking. Lucien stayed half a step behind her, his presence solid and unshakable, like gravity. They found their table near the back of the ballroom, far enough from the stage to avoid immediate scrutiny, close enough to watch everything unfold. Damien Ashcroft was standing near the bar, surrounded by people who laughed too loud at jokes that probably weren't funny. He looked older, thinner, the kind of thin that came from stress disguised as discipline. Celeste was next to him, stunning in white, her hand resting on his arm with the casual possessiveness of someone who believed she'd won. Evelyn watched them, studied them, memorized every detail, and waited. The speeches started 20 minutes later. The foundation director thanked everyone for their generosity. A senator gave a brief address about the importance of philanthropy. A cancer survivor spoke about the research Damien's donations had funded. Then Damien took the stage. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. He smiled the way he'd always smiled. Practiced. Perfect. Empty. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Damien began, his voice carrying across the ballroom with the same polish he'd used 4 years ago when he'd destroyed her. "I've always believed that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give back." Evelyn felt Lucien's hand settle on her knee under the table, steadying, grounding. "Over the past decade," Damien continued, "I've had the privilege of supporting causes that matter, children's hospitals, cancer research, education programs that give young people opportunities they might not otherwise have." The crowd murmured approvingly. Evelyn's nails dug into her palms. Damien kept talking, about generosity, about legacy, about building a better world. And then, halfway through a sentence about responsibility, his eyes swept across the ballroom and caught on a woman in a crimson dress standing near the back. He stopped talking. The silence stretched. People started shifting in their seats. The foundation director looked confused. Celeste touched Damien's arm, whispering something inaudible, but Damien didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the woman in crimson like he was seeing a ghost. Because he was. Evelyn stood up slowly. Lucien stood with her, his hand brushing the small of her back. They walked toward the stage, not running, not hesitating, just walking, like they had every right to be there, because they did. The crowd parted. Damien's face went white. Evelyn stopped at the base of the stage, close enough that everyone in the ballroom could see her, close enough that Damien had nowhere to hide. "Hello, Damien," she said, her voice carrying through the perfect acoustics like a blade. Damien's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Vivienne?" he whispered. "Not anymore," Evelyn said. She turned to face the crowd, 500 people staring at her, cameras pointed her direction, the kind of attention she used to fear. "Not anymore." "My name is Evelyn Vale," she said, her voice steady. "And 4 years ago, this man humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered, took everything I'd built, replaced me publicly, erased me like I'd never existed." The ballroom was silent now, completely. The kind of silence that felt like pressure. "I came here tonight," Evelyn continued, "to tell you something important, something you all deserve to know." Damien found his voice. "Security is busy," Lucien said quietly, stepping forward. His tone was conversational, but something in his posture made every security guard in the room hesitate. "Let her finish." Evelyn met Damien's eyes. "I helped you build that empire, Damien. I know every account. Every hidden partnership, every fraudulent deal buried under charity galas and press releases. And over the past 4 years, I've been watching it all collapse. Damien's face went from white to gray. You're lying. Montrose Capital pulled out 2 weeks ago, Evelyn said. Your lead counsel resigned. 3 major contracts evaporated yesterday. And tomorrow morning, federal investigators are going to receive an anonymous tip about your offshore accounts. She pulled a thumb drive from her clutch and held it up. Everything's on here, she said. Every crime, every lie, every piece of the empire you stole from me. Damien's voice cracked. You can't do this. I already did. Celeste stepped forward, her face pale. This is insane. Damien, call the police. The police? Evelyn turned to her. You mean the same police who've been bought and paid for by the man you married? The ones who look the other way when powerful men break laws? She looked back at Damien. I'm not here for revenge, she said quietly. I'm here to collect a debt. You took 4 years of my life. I'm taking everything you built in mine. And then she set the thumb drive on the edge of the stage, turned around, and walked out of the ballroom with Lucien beside her. Behind them, chaos erupted, voices shouting, cameras flashing, Damien's voice screaming her name. But Evelyn didn't look back, because she was done looking back. And for the first time in 4 years, she felt something close to... The car was waiting outside the Whitmore Hotel. Black sedan, tinted windows, engine already running. Lucien opened the door for Evelyn, and she slid inside without looking back at the chaos spilling out of the ballroom behind them. Voices shouting her name, camera flashes lighting up the marble steps like lightning. Security guards trying to restore order to a room that had just watched a ghost walk back into the world of the living. The door closed. The noise cut off. The driver pulled away from the curb without asking where they were going. Evelyn sat in the back seat, hands trembling in her lap, adrenaline crashing through her system like a tidal wave. She'd done it. She'd stood in front of Damien Ashcroft and every person who mattered and told them the truth. She'd watched his face collapse, watched him realize that the woman he'd erased had come back to erase him. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollow. Lucien was quiet beside her, watching the city lights blur past the window. His jaw was tight. His hands were relaxed on his knees, but there was something coiled in his posture that hadn't been there an hour ago. That was reckless, he said finally. Evelyn looked at him. It was necessary. Necessary would have been letting the investigators do their job. What you did back there was theater. Theater that worked. Theater that put a target on your back, Lucien said, his voice flat. You just told 500 people, including reporters, politicians, and at least 3 federal prosecutors, that you have evidence of financial crimes. Which means you just made yourself a witness. Which means you're no longer protected by anonymity. The words landed like ice water. Evelyn's hands stilled. What are you saying? I'm saying Damien's lawyers are going to spend the next 48 hours trying to destroy your credibility. They're going to dig up every piece of your past, every connection to me, every questionable decision you made while you were married to him. And when they're finished, they're going to paint you as a scorned ex-wife who fabricated evidence to ruin a man who moved on. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. The evidence is real. I know that. You know that. But a jury won't care if Damien's lawyers can make you look unstable. I'm not unstable. Lucien finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were harder than she'd ever seen them. You walked into a room full of cameras and announced your real identity after spending 4 years hiding. That's not stable. That's suicidal. The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke. Evelyn's voice came out sharp. You said you'd support whatever I decided. I said I'd stop if you wanted to stop, Lucien replied. I didn't say I'd stand by and watch you destroy yourself. This isn't destroying myself. This is finishing what we started. No, this is you needing him to see your face when his world collapses. That's not justice. That's ego. The words hit like a slap. Evelyn turned away, staring out the window at the city rushing past. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, pale, sharp, unfamiliar. You don't get to judge me, she said quietly. I'm not judging you. I'm trying to protect you. By telling me I made a mistake? By telling you the truth. The car pulled up in front of the hotel. The driver didn't turn around, didn't speak, just waited. Evelyn opened the door and got out without another word. She didn't go back to the suite. She walked, block after block through the financial district, past buildings she used to work in, past restaurants she used to eat at with Damien when they were still pretending their marriage was built on something other than ambition and convenience. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. Once, twice, 3 times. She ignored it. By the time she reached the waterfront, her feet were screaming inside the heels she'd worn for the gala. She stopped at a bench overlooking the harbor and sat down, kicking off the shoes and letting the cold air bite at her skin. The city stretched out behind her, all glass and steel and light. In front of her, the water was black and endless, reflecting nothing. She thought about Damien's face when he'd seen her, the shock, the fear, the humiliation. She thought about the thumb drive she'd left on the stage, the evidence that would destroy him. She thought about Lucian's words in the car. That's not justice. That's ego. And she realized, sitting there in a crimson gown on a bench, overlooking water that looked like it went on forever, that he was right. She'd needed Damien to see her, needed him to know that the woman he'd discarded had come back stronger, sharper, more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. But that need had cost her something, her anonymity, her safety, her ability to walk away clean. She'd burned the bridge behind her, and now she was standing on the other side wondering if she'd made it across or just trapped herself on an island. Her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out. 7 missed calls from Lucian. 3 text messages. The most recent one said, "We need to talk, now." Well, when she got back to the hotel suite, Lucien was standing in the living room with his laptop open on the coffee table and an expression that looked like he'd been waiting for bad news to arrive. "Sit down," he said. Evelyn set her clutch on the table. "What happened?" "Damien's lawyers filed an emergency motion an hour ago. They're requesting a restraining order against you, claiming harassment and defamation." "That's insane." "That's strategy," Lucian said. "They're trying to discredit you before the evidence goes public." Evelyn sat down slowly. "The evidence is solid. It doesn't matter what they say about me." Lucien turned the laptop around so she could see the screen. It was a news article, posted 20 minutes ago. The headline read, "Billionaire's ex-wife crashes charity gala, makes wild accusations." Evelyn's stomach dropped. She scrolled through the article. It was brutal, surgical, every sentence designed to make her look unstable. Sources close to Ashcroft Industries describe Vivienne Mercer as obsessed with her ex-husband. Friends say she struggled with mental health issues during the marriage. Legal experts question whether her allegations have any basis in fact. "This is character assassination," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Lucien agreed. "And it's going to get worse." He pulled up another article, then another. Within an hour of her walking out of that ballroom, Damien's PR team had flooded the media with a counter-narrative, a scorned wife, a fabricated vendetta, a woman who couldn't accept that her husband had moved on. "They're destroying me," Evelyn said. "They're trying to," Lucien replied. "But they haven't succeeded yet. The evidence is still solid. The federal investigation is still happening. This is just noise." But it didn't feel like noise. It felt like drowning. Evelyn stood up and walked to the window. The city looked the same as it had an hour ago. Glass and steel and light. But now it felt hostile. Like every building was watching her, judging her, waiting for her to collapse under the weight of her own choices. "What do we do?" she asked. Lucien closed the laptop. "We wait. The investigators will review the evidence. If it's as solid as we think it is, Damien's lawyers won't be able to spin their way out of federal charges. And if it's not?" Lucien was quiet for a long moment. "Then we have a problem." The problem arrived at 6 the next morning in the form of Garrett, standing in the doorway of the hotel suite with a folder in his hand and an expression that looked like he'd just watched someone die. "We need to talk," Garrett said. Lucien was already awake, sitting at the desk with coffee and the laptop. Evelyn walked out of the bedroom in sweatpants and one of Lucian's shirts, her hair still damp from the shower. "What happened?" Lucien asked. Garrett set the folder on the desk. "The offshore accounts, the ones you flagged for the investigators." "What about them?" "They're empty." The room went silent. Evelyn felt her heartbeat stutter. "What do you mean empty?" "I mean someone drained them," Garrett said. "Every account. Every shell corporation, every hidden trust. The money's gone. Lucien opened the folder and started flipping through the pages. Bank statements, wire transfer records, account closures dated 3 days ago. How is this possible? Evelyn asked, her voice shaking. Those accounts were buried under layers of legal paperwork. No one could access them without authorization. Someone had authorization, Garrett said quietly. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. Celeste. Lucien looked up sharply. You think she moved the money? I know she did, Evelyn said, her mind racing. She's been managing his offshore operations since I left. She would have had access to everything, and if she suspected someone was targeting them, she would have moved the assets to protect him. Or to protect herself, Lucien said. Garrett nodded. There's more. The wire transfers didn't go to Damien's accounts. They went to accounts registered under Celeste's name, offshore trusts in the Caymans and Singapore, completely separate from Ashcroft Industries. Evelyn felt the floor tilt under her feet. She stole from him. Looks that way. Which means the evidence we gave to the investigators is useless, Lucien said, his voice flat. Because the accounts we flagged are now empty. No money trail, no proof of fraud, just a bunch of closed accounts and a woman who looks like she's making false accusations. Evelyn sat down before her legs gave out. This can't be happening. It's happening, Garrett said, and it gets worse. Celeste filed for divorce this morning. She's claiming Damien was abusive, that she feared for her safety, that she moved the assets to protect herself from his control. That's a lie, Evelyn said. Maybe, Garrett replied, but it's a lie that makes her look like a victim, and it makes you look like a woman who's been replaced by someone smarter. The words landed like a punch to the gut. Evelyn stared at the folder on the desk, at the evidence of everything she'd built over 4 years, now worthless because someone had outmaneuvered her in the exact same way she'd tried to outmaneuver Damien. She played us, Evelyn said quietly. She played everyone, Lucien replied. Including Damien. Chatham. By noon, the media had picked up the story. Ashcroft wife files for divorce, claims financial abuse. Celeste Laurent alleges husband used offshore accounts to hide assets. Federal investigators find no evidence of fraud in Ashcroft Empire. Evelyn sat on the couch in the hotel suite, watching the news coverage with the kind of numb detachment that came after shock wore off and left nothing but exhaustion. Celeste was everywhere. Press conferences, interview clips. A statement released through her lawyers describing years of emotional manipulation and financial control. She looked perfect, calm, sympathetic, the kind of victim people wanted to believe in. And Evelyn, sitting there in sweatpants with evidence that had turned to ash in her hands, looked like exactly what Damien's lawyers had said she was, a scorned ex-wife who couldn't let go. Lucien stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and controlled as he spoke to someone on the other end. When he hung up, his expression was grim. The investigators closed the case, he said. No charges filed. Insufficient evidence. Evelyn didn't respond, didn't move, just stared at the television screen where Celeste was giving another interview, her eyes wet with carefully manufactured tears. She destroyed everything, Evelyn said finally. Yes, 4 years of work, gone. Yes. And now Damien gets to walk away clean while I look like I fabricated everything. Lucien crossed the room and sat down next to her. Not clean. He lost his wife, his reputation took a hit, and his company's stock dropped 15% this morning. That's not nothing. It's not enough. I know. Evelyn turned to look at him. You were right. What I did last night was reckless. I should have stayed hidden, should have let the investigators do their job, should have trusted the process instead of needing him to see my face. Maybe, Lucien said, or maybe Celeste would have moved the money anyway. Maybe this was always going to end this way. You don't believe that. No, he admitted. I don't. Evelyn felt something crack inside her chest. Not anger, not grief. Something worse. The realization that she'd spent 4 years rebuilding herself into a weapon sharp enough to destroy Damien Ashcroft, only to discover that someone else had already beaten her to it, and that person had done it better. What do I do now? She asked quietly. Lucien was silent for a long time. Then he said, You walk away. I can't. You have to. No. Evelyn stood up, pacing the length of the living room like a caged animal. I didn't spend 4 years planning this just to walk away because someone outsmarted me. Evelyn, don't, she snapped. Don't tell me it's over. Don't tell me to let it go. Don't tell me that this is how it ends. Then how does it end? Lucian asked, his voice calm but edged with something dangerous. You going after Celeste? Trying to expose her the same way you tried to expose Damien? Because that worked out really well the first time. The sarcasm hit like acid. Evelyn turned on him. You think this is funny? I think you're spiraling. I'm trying to survive. No, you're trying to win, and there's a difference. Fuck you, Evelyn said, the words coming out raw and vicious. You don't get to stand there and tell me I'm wrong when you're the one who helped me get here. You're the one who told me we could destroy him. You're the one who said we were 3 moves ahead. We were, Lucian said, standing up now, his voice hardening. Until you decided to make a public spectacle instead of letting the plan work. The plan failed because Celeste was smarter than both of us. No. The plan failed because you needed revenge more than you needed justice. The accusation hung in the air between them like poison. Evelyn felt her hand start shaking. You don't know what it's like to be erased. You're right, I don't. But I know what it's like to spend years building something and watch it collapse because you made one wrong move at the wrong time. And that's what you did last night. I made the only move I could. You made the move that felt good, Lucien said, and now you're paying for it. Evelyn wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to hit him or cry or do anything that would release the pressure building inside her chest, but she didn't. Because underneath the anger, underneath the humiliation, underneath the exhaustion, she knew he was right. She'd needed Damien to see her face, needed him to know she'd survived, needed the validation of watching him crumble in public. And that need had cost her everything. What am I supposed to do? She asked, her voice breaking. Lucian's expression softened slightly. You're supposed to accept that this chapter is over. I can't. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not this time. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his face that made her stomach turn. He was done, not with her, but with this, with the revenge, with the endless cycle of trying to destroy people who'd already moved on. You're walking away, she said. Yes. Just like that. Just like that. And what am I supposed to do? Lucian walked over to her and took her hands in his. His grip was solid, warm, real. You're supposed to come with me, he said quietly. Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes. I don't know how to let this go. I know, but you're going to have to learn. That night, Evelyn stood on the balcony of the hotel suite, staring out at the city that had once been hers and now felt like foreign territory. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She opened it. You should have stayed dead, Vivienne. Coming back was a mistake. But don't worry, I'll finish what you started. See, Evelyn's blood ran cold. Celeste. She read the message again, then again. I'll finish what you started. The words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a promise. Evelyn walked back inside. Lucien was packing, his suitcase open on the bed, clothes folded with the kind of precision that made everything look easy. We need to leave, he said without looking up. Tonight, before this gets worse. It's already worse, Evelyn said, holding up her phone. Lucien read the message. His jaw tightened. She's baiting you. I know. So we ignore it. No. Lucien looked up sharply. Evelyn, she stole everything, Lucien, from me, from Damien, and now she's threatening me. So we let the police handle it. The police won't do anything. She's a victim now. I'm the unstable ex-wife. No one's going to believe me. Then we walk away. I can't. Lucien set down the shirt he'd been folding. Why not? Because if I walk away now, she wins. Damien wins. Everyone who ever underestimated me wins. And if you stay, Evelyn met his eyes. Then I finish this, one way or another. Lucien was quiet for a long time. Then he said, if you do this, you do it alone. The words landed like a death sentence. What? I told you I'd help you destroy Damien, Lucian said, his voice calm but final. I did. I used every resource I had. I put my reputation on the line, and it wasn't enough. So now I'm done. You're abandoning me. I'm protecting you. From yourself. That's not your choice to make. Yes, Lucian said. It is. Because I love you. And I'm not going to stand by and watch you destroy yourself chasing something you can't catch. The words should have felt like comfort. Instead, they felt like betrayal. So that's it? Evelyn asked, her voice shaking. You're just leaving. I'm giving you a choice, Lucian said. Come with me. Leave this city. Leave Damien and Celeste and all of this behind. Or stay here and keep fighting a battle you've already lost. Evelyn felt something inside her shatter. I can't just walk away. Then I can't stay. The silence between them was deafening. Lucian picked up his suitcase and walked toward the door. He stopped in the doorway, his back to her. I'll be at the airport until midnight, he said quietly. If you change your mind, I'll be there. Then he walked out, and Evelyn stood alone in the hotel suite, surrounded by the ruins of everything she'd tried to build, holding a phone with a message from a woman who'd beaten her at her own game. She looked at the message again. I'll finish what you started. And something cold and final settled in her chest. If Lucian thought she was going to walk away, he didn't know her at all. She wasn't done. Not even close. She pulled up Celeste's number, easy enough to find through the company directory, and typed a response. Let's talk. Face to face. Tomorrow. You name the place. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response came back in less than a minute. Ashcroft Tower. Penthouse. Noon. Come alone. Evelyn stared at the message. It was a trap. Obviously. But it was also the only move she had left. She set the phone down, walked into the bathroom, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was exhausted, hollow, barely recognizable, but she was still standing, and that had to count for something. She thought about Lucian waiting at the airport, about the life they could have if she just let this go. She thought about Damien and Celeste and the empire they'd built on her bones. She thought about the last 4 years, the harbor town, the library, the late nights studying finance law and offshore accounts, the cold mornings waking up in a room that smelled like detergent and regret. All of it leading to this moment, this choice, walk away and survive, or walk into the trap and finish what she started. Evelyn took a breath. Then she started packing, not for the airport, for war. Because if Celeste Laurent thought she could threaten her and walk away clean, she was about to learn the same lesson Damien had learned 4 years too late. You don't erase Vivienne Mercer. You don't erase Evelyn Vale. You don't erase a woman who's already died once and came back sharper. And by the time noon rolled around tomorrow, one of them was going to understand that, the hard way. The Ashcroft Tower stood 63 floors above the financial district, all glass and steel and the kind of arrogance that came from believing height equaled power. Evelyn stood across the street at 11:45 in the morning, staring up at the building she used to call hers, feeling the weight of every choice that had led her back to this moment. She'd spent the night awake, not planning, not strategizing, just sitting in the hotel suite with the lights off, watching the city move outside the window, feeling the absence of Lucian like a missing limb. He hadn't called. She hadn't gone to the airport. By midnight, whatever they'd built together had ended without ceremony or closure. Just silence and the knowledge that some bridges couldn't be uncrossed once you burned them. Now she stood alone on a sidewalk crowded with people who had no idea they were walking past a woman about to do something irreversibly stupid. Her phone buzzed. A text from Celeste. Penthouse. Security will let you up. Don't be late. Evelyn crossed the street. The lobby was exactly as she remembered it. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A reception desk staffed by people trained to smile at wealth and ignore everyone else. Security guards who looked like they'd been hired from the same agency that supplied bodyguards for heads of state. One of them stepped forward when she approached. Evelyn Vale, she said before he could ask. I'm expected. The guard checked his tablet, nodded once, and gestured toward the private elevator at the back of the lobby. The one that only went to the penthouse. The one Damien used to use when he wanted to avoid being seen with people who mattered less than he did. Evelyn stepped inside. The doors closed. The elevator rose with the kind of smooth acceleration that costs more than most people's cars. She watched the floor numbers climb. 40, 50, 60. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished metal walls. She'd dressed simply. Black jeans, gray sweater, boots with traction in case she needed to run. No jewelry, no makeup, nothing that could be grabbed or used against her. She looked like someone preparing for violence. Because she was. The elevator slowed. The doors opened. The penthouse stretched out before her, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that cost more than houses, art on the walls that belonged in museums. Damien's kingdom, or what used to be his kingdom before Celeste had taken it from him the same way Evelyn had tried to. Celeste stood near the windows, backlit by morning sun, wearing a white suit that made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread about powerful women who didn't apologize for anything. She turned when Evelyn entered. "You came," Celeste said. Her voice was calm, almost friendly, like they were meeting for coffee instead of a confrontation that could end with one of them destroyed. "You invited me," Evelyn replied, stepping out of the elevator. The doors closed behind her with a soft click that sounded too much like a lock sliding into place. Celeste smiled. "I wasn't sure you'd be stupid enough to walk into an obvious trap. And yet here I am." "Here you are." They stared at each other across 20 feet of expensive flooring. Two women who'd been married to the same man. Two women who'd learned the same lessons about power and survival. Two women who'd both decided that the only way forward was through. "Where's Damien?" Evelyn asked. "Downstairs in his office," Celeste said. "Trying to salvage what's left of his reputation. He doesn't know you're here. He doesn't know about this meeting, and if things go the way I plan, he never will." "What do you want?" Celeste walked over to the bar and poured herself a drink. Whiskey. Neat. She didn't offer Evelyn one. "I want to make sure we understand each other," Celeste said, taking a sip. "You tried to destroy Damien. I beat you to it. Now you're angry because someone played the same game you were playing and did it better." "You didn't just beat me to it," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "You stole from both of us. You moved assets that belonged to Ashcroft Industries into your own accounts. That's not revenge. That's theft." "Semantics. It's fraud." Celeste laughed. Short, sharp, genuine. "You're going to lecture me about fraud? You, the woman who helped Damien build half those offshore accounts in the first place?" The accusation landed like a blade. Evelyn didn't flinch. "I'm not claiming to be innocent, but I'm also not pretending this was about justice. You saw an opportunity, and you took it, just like he did to me." "Exactly like he did to you," Celeste agreed. "Which is why I don't understand why you're upset. I did what you were too scared to do. I took everything, no half measures, no moral compromises, no leaving money on the table because I was worried about looking like the villain." "You made yourself look like a victim." "I made myself look smart," Celeste corrected. "Victims get sympathy. Smart women get money. And I got both." She set down her glass and walked closer, close enough that Evelyn could see the calculation in her eyes. The kind of calculation that came from years of watching men like Damien operate and learning every trick they used. "You want to know the difference between you and me?" Celeste asked. "You spent 4 years planning revenge. I spent 6 months planning survival. You wanted him to suffer. I wanted him to disappear. You needed an audience. I needed a bank account. And now you have both. Now I have everything." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You threatened me. Last night, you texted me." "I warned you," Celeste said. "There's a difference. You walked into that gala and made yourself a target. You told 500 people you had evidence of crimes. You painted a bullseye on your own back. I was just making sure you understood the consequences." "The consequences of what?" "Of continuing this vendetta," Celeste said, her voice dropping lower. "You lost, Evelyn. Damien's reputation is in tatters. His company is hemorrhaging investors. His accounts are empty. Everything you wanted to happen to him has already happened. So why are you still here?" "Because you don't get to threaten me and walk away." Celeste's smile widened. "Who said I'm walking away?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn felt her pulse kick up. "What does that mean?" "It means I didn't bring you here to gloat," Celeste said. "I brought you here to make you an offer." "I'm not interested." "You haven't heard it yet." "I don't need to." Celeste picked up a folder from the coffee table and held it out. You might want to reconsider. Evelyn didn't move, didn't take the folder, just stared at Celeste with the kind of wariness that came from knowing that every word out of her mouth was part of a larger trap. What's in the folder? Evelyn asked. Proof, Celeste said, that Damien knew about your plan, that he knew you were coming back to destroy him, that he hired private investigators to track you for the last 2 years. The words hit like ice water. Evelyn's breath caught. You're lying. Am I? Celeste opened the folder and held up a photograph. It was Evelyn, taken 6 months ago, outside the library in the harbor town. Grainy, distant, but unmistakably her. He's been watching you, Celeste said quietly. The whole time you thought you were invisible, he knew exactly where you were. He knew you were planning something, and he was waiting for you to make your move so he could destroy you publicly. Evelyn felt the floor tilt under her feet. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to understand something, Celeste said, setting the folder down. Damien Ashcroft is not a victim. He's not a man who got blindsided by his ex-wife's revenge plot. He's a predator who saw you coming from miles away and let you walk into a trap. If that's true, why didn't he stop me? Because he wanted you to humiliate yourself, Celeste said. He wanted you to stand up in front of everyone and make accusations he could disprove. He wanted you to look unstable, obsessed. He wanted to erase you a second time. And you gave him exactly what he wanted. The words landed like bullets. Evelyn's hands were shaking now. Not from fear, from rage. From the realization that every step she'd taken, every plan she'd made, every move she'd calculated had been watched by the man she was trying to destroy. You're lying, Evelyn said again, but her voice sounded hollow even to herself. I'm not, Celeste replied. And deep down you know it, because men like Damien don't lose by accident. They lose because someone smarter than them decides they should. Someone like you. Exactly like me. Celeste walked back to the windows and stood with her back to the city, silhouetted against the light. I'm not your enemy, Evelyn, she said. I'm the only person in this entire mess who actually understands what you went through, because I went through it too. The humiliation, the erasure, the realization that the man you trusted saw you as infrastructure instead of a person. Damien didn't erase you. You're still here. Only because I was smarter about my exit strategy, Celeste said. I saw what he did to you. I learned from it. And when I realized he was planning to do the same thing to me, I made sure I left with everything that mattered. His money. Our money, Celeste corrected. Money I helped him hide. Money I helped him steal. Money I earned by playing the same role you played for 11 years. So don't stand there and act like I'm the villain when all I did was refuse to let history repeat itself. Evelyn wanted to hate her. Wanted to see her as the enemy. Wanted to believe that this was a fight between good and evil, instead of a fight between two women who'd both been broken by the same man and learned to survive by becoming just as ruthless as he was. But she couldn't, because Celeste was right. What's the offer? Evelyn asked finally. Celeste turned to face her. Help me finish him. Not halfway, not symbolically. Actually finish him. Use everything you know about his operation, every weakness, every hidden vulnerability. Help me make sure Damien Ashcroft doesn't just lose his company, he loses everything, his reputation, his freedom, his ability to ever hurt anyone again. And in exchange, I give you half of what I took, $50 million. Enough to disappear, enough to start over, enough to never have to think about him again. The offer hung in the air between them. $50 million. Financial security for the rest of her life. Freedom. And all she had to do was help the woman who'd beaten her destroy the man they both hated. Why do you need me? Evelyn asked. You already took his money. You already filed for divorce. You already made yourself look like a victim. What more is there to do? There's a difference between taking his money and making sure he can't rebuild, Celeste said. Right now, Damien still has connections, political allies, investors who believe in him, friends who think this is all a misunderstanding. But if we work together, we can make sure every one of those people sees him for what he really is. A thief. A monster, Celeste corrected. The kind of man who destroys people for sport. The kind of man who should never have been allowed to build an empire in the first place. Evelyn stared at her. At the woman who'd replaced her. At the woman who'd outsmarted her. At the woman who was now offering her a partnership built on mutual destruction. How do I know you won't betray me the same way you betrayed him? Evelyn asked. Celeste's smile was cold. You don't. But you also don't have any other options. You burned your bridge with Lucien. You exposed yourself publicly. You made yourself a target, and now the only way forward is through Damien's corpse. The brutality of the statement was almost beautiful in its honesty. Evelyn took a breath, then another. Then she said, I need time to think. You have 5 minutes, Celeste said, because in 6 minutes, Damien is going to walk through that door for a meeting he thinks is about salvaging his company. And when he does, you're either going to be my ally or you're going to be collateral damage. He's coming here? I told you this was a trap, Celeste said. I just didn't tell you who it was for. Before Evelyn could respond, the elevator chimed. The doors opened, and Damien Ashcroft stepped into the penthouse. He looked older than he had at the gala, thinner, the kind of thin that came from stress eating away at muscle and leaving only edges. His suit was perfect, his hair was perfect, but his eyes were bloodshot and his hands were trembling slightly as he loosened his tie. He saw Celeste first, then his eyes shifted to Evelyn, and everything in his face went still. What is this? He asked, his voice hoarse. This is a conversation, Celeste said calmly. Close the door, Damien. He didn't move, just stood there in the elevator doorway, staring at Evelyn like she was a ghost he'd thought he'd successfully buried. You, he said finally, you're supposed to be dead? Evelyn finished. Gone? Erased? Which one were you hoping for? Damien's jaw tightened. He stepped out of the elevator and let the doors close behind him. What are you doing here? I invited her, Celeste said. We've been having a very interesting discussion about you. Damien turned to Celeste, and for the first time, Evelyn saw real fear in his eyes. What did you tell her? Everything. Celeste, I told her about the investigators you hired, Celeste continued, her voice steady, about how you've been tracking her for 2 years, about how you knew she was coming back, and you let her walk into a trap at the gala, about how you used her for publicity and then planned to destroy her credibility so thoroughly she'd never be able to show her face in this city again. Damien went pale. That's not... It's exactly true, Celeste said, and you know it. Just like you know that the only reason your offshore accounts are empty is because I moved the money before the investigators could find it. Just like you know that the only reason you're not in federal custody right now is because I made you look like a victim instead of a criminal. I trusted you, Damien said, his voice breaking. Celeste laughed. You trusted me the same way you trusted Vivienne, which is to say, you didn't trust me at all. You just thought I was too stupid to see through you. Damien turned back to Evelyn. This is your fault. You came back. You started this. If you'd just stayed gone. If I'd stayed gone, you'd still be a billionaire, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through his excuses like glass. But I didn't stay gone. I came back. And now your empire is collapsing, and your wife is leaving you, and everyone who ever believed in you is walking away. So don't stand there and blame me for consequences you earned. Damien's hands clenched into fists. You destroyed everything. No, Evelyn said. I exposed what was already there. The fraud, the lies, the offshore accounts, the shell corporations, all of it built on money you stole and lives you ruined. I didn't destroy your empire. I just showed people what it was made of. You're insane, Damien said, his voice rising. You're obsessed. You can't let go. You're right, Evelyn interrupted. I can't let go. Because men like you don't get to erase women like me and walk away clean. Because you took 11 years of my life and treated them like they didn't matter. Because you humiliated me in front of everyone I knew and expected me to disappear quietly. She took a step closer. But I didn't disappear, she said. I came back. And I'm going to make sure that every time you close your eyes for the rest of your life, you see my face. Damien's expression twisted into something ugly. You think you've won? You think standing here with her, he gestured at Celeste, makes you powerful? You're nothing. You've always been nothing. The only reason you mattered was because I let you matter. The words should have hurt. 5 years ago they would have. But now they just sounded desperate. You're right, Evelyn said quietly. I was nothing. When I was married to you, I was invisible. I was infrastructure. I was the woman behind the empire who never got credit for anything she built. But that's not who I am anymore. And the fact that you still see me that way is exactly why you're going to lose. Damien turned to Celeste. If you think she's going to help you, you're wrong. She's going to betray you the same way she tried to betray me. I don't need her help, Celeste said. I've already won. I have the money. I have the accounts. I have the evidence of every crime you committed buried in files that will never see the light of day as long as you cooperate. Cooperate with what? Celeste walked over to the coffee table and picked up a document. She held it out to Damien. Sign this, she said. Damien didn't take it. What is it? A full transfer of assets. Everything still in your name goes to me. The penthouse, the cars, the remaining accounts. All of it. You're insane. I'm thorough, Celeste corrected. Sign it, and I'll make sure the federal investigators never receive the evidence that would put you in prison for the next 20 years. Refuse, and I'll destroy you so completely you'll wish Vivienne's plan had worked. Damien's face went from pale to gray. This is extortion. This is survival, Celeste said, and you have 60 seconds to decide whether you'd rather be broke or incarcerated. Evelyn watched the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment. This was what victory looked like. Not dramatic, not satisfying, just two people who'd spent years manipulating each other finally reaching the inevitable conclusion. Damien looked at the document, then at Celeste, then at Evelyn. You planned this together, he said finally. No, Evelyn replied. She planned this. I just showed up to watch. Then why are you here? Evelyn thought about the question, thought about the last 4 years, thought about the harbor town and the library and the night spent studying offshore accounts, thought about Lucien waiting at the airport, thought about the choice she'd made to come here instead of leaving. I'm here, she said slowly, because I needed to see your face when you realized you'd lost. And there it was, the moment she'd been waiting for. The look in Damien's eyes when he finally understood that the woman he'd erased had come back and watched his entire world collapse. It wasn't satisfying, it was just sad. Damien picked up the pen from the coffee table. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. If I sign this, he said, what happens to me? You disappear, Celeste said. You leave the city, you change your name, you start over somewhere no one knows who you are. And if you're smart, you never come back. And if I refuse? Then federal agents show up at your door tomorrow morning with enough evidence to make sure you spend the next 2 decades in a cell. Damien stared at the document for a long time, then he signed it. His signature was barely legible, just a scrawl that looked like it had been written by someone who'd already given up. Celeste took the document and smiled. Smart choice. Damien set down the pen and looked at Evelyn one last time. I hope you're happy, he said. Evelyn met his eyes. I'm not. But I'm done. And she meant it. She turned and walked toward the elevator without looking back. Behind her, she could hear Celeste speaking to Damien in a low voice, giving him instructions, telling him where to go, what to do, how to disappear. The elevator doors opened. Evelyn stepped inside. And as the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of Damien Ashcroft standing in the middle of the penthouse he'd built with her help, looking small and broken and alone. The elevator descended. 40 floors, 30, 20. Her phone buzzed, a text from Celeste. The money will be in your account by tomorrow. Enjoy your freedom. Evelyn stared at the message. $50 million. Enough to disappear. Enough to start over. Enough to never think about Damien or Celeste or any of this again. She should have felt victorious. She should have felt free. Instead, she just felt empty. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Evelyn stepped out into the marble-floored space filled with people who had no idea what had just happened 63 floors above them. She walked through the lobby, past security, past reception, out onto the street where the city moved around her like she was invisible. Her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out, expecting another message from Celeste. But it wasn't from Celeste, it was from Lucien. I'm still at the airport. Gate 47, flight leaves in 20 minutes. Last chance. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk with people streaming past her in both directions, staring at the message. 20 minutes. Enough time to catch a cab. Enough time to make it through security. Enough time to walk onto that plane and leave everything behind. She looked up at the Ashcroft Tower, at the building that used to represent everything she wanted. at the empire she'd helped build and then watched collapse. Then she looked down at her phone, at the message from the only person who'd ever told her the truth. She thought about Damien signing away his life, about Celeste standing in that penthouse with everything she'd stolen, about 4 years spent planning revenge that ended with nothing but emptiness. She thought about Lucien saying, "I love you," before walking out the door. And she realized something. Revenge hadn't made her whole. It had just made her hollow. She flagged down a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked. Evelyn took a breath. Then she said, "The airport, and make it fast." The cab hit every red light between the Ashcroft Tower and the airport. Evelyn sat in the back seat watching the city blur past the window, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. The driver kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, probably wondering why she looked like someone running from a crime scene. She checked the time. 15 minutes until Lucien's flight left. 12 if traffic cooperated. 10 if she got lucky. The cab crawled through an intersection choked with construction. Evelyn's leg bounced against the seat. Her breath came in short, shallow pulls. She could feel the weight of the last 4 years pressing down on her chest. The harbor town, the library, the nights spent memorizing Damien's empire so she could dismantle it piece by piece, all of it leading to a penthouse where she'd watched him sign away everything he'd built while feeling nothing but emptiness. "Can you go any faster?" she asked. "Lady, I'm doing the best I can," the driver replied, his accent thick with frustration. "You want faster. You should have left earlier." She wanted to tell him that leaving earlier would have meant not watching Damien Ashcroft break, would have meant not seeing Celeste Laurent stand in that penthouse like a queen surveying conquered territory, would have meant walking away before understanding that revenge didn't heal wounds. It just reopened them in different shapes. But she didn't say any of that. She just stared out the window and willed the traffic to move. The cab finally cleared the construction zone and accelerated onto the highway. The airport signs started appearing: departures, Terminal B, ticketing. Evelyn's pulse kicked up. 8 minutes, maybe 7 if security was light. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "The transfer is complete. $50 million in the account we discussed. Pleasure doing business." So Evelyn stared at the message. $50 million. More money than most people earned in 10 lifetimes. Enough to disappear anywhere in the world. Enough to become someone new again. But it felt like blood money, because that's exactly what it was. She deleted the message without responding. The cab pulled up to departures. Evelyn threw 320s at the driver and ran. The airport was a nightmare of crowds and announcements and people moving too slowly through security checkpoints. Evelyn pushed through the mass of travelers, her boots hitting the floor with sharp, urgent rhythm. Gate 47 was in Terminal C. She was in Terminal B. She ran, past families dragging suitcases, past businessmen on phone calls, past couples holding hands and looking at departure boards like they had all the time in the world. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she kept running, because somewhere ahead of her was the only person who'd ever looked at her damage and chosen to stay anyway. She cleared security with 2 minutes to spare. The TSA agent looked at her like she was insane. She probably was. Gate 47 was at the end of a long corridor lined with closed shops and empty seating areas. The display board above the gate said "Boarding, Final Call." Evelyn's heart dropped. She sprinted the last 100 feet and skidded to a stop at the gate desk where a flight attendant was closing the door to the jetway. "Wait!" Evelyn gasped, her voice ragged. "Wait, please!" The attendant turned. "I'm sorry, boarding is closed." "There's someone on that plane. I need to—" "Ma'am, the door is closed. You'll have to catch the next flight." "Please," Evelyn said, and she hated how desperate she sounded. "Please, just let me—" "Evelyn," she turned. Lucien was standing 20 feet away, holding a duffel bag and wearing the same expression he'd worn the night they met, calculating, patient, impossible to read. "You came back," the flight attendant said to him, confused. "Change of plans," Lucien replied, his eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. The attendant looked between them, sighed like she'd seen this movie 1,000 times, and waved them away from the gate. "Next time, maybe don't cut it so close." Lucien walked over to Evelyn slowly, like he was approaching something wild that might bolt if he moved too fast. You're supposed to be on that plane, Evelyn said. I was, Lucien replied. I got to my seat, put my bag in the overhead, sat down, and then I realized I couldn't leave without knowing you were safe. So you got off. So I got off. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. Not relief, something rawer. Something that tasted like honesty stripped of every defense mechanism she'd spent 4 years building. I went to the penthouse, she said. Celeste made me an offer. Help her destroy Damien completely in exchange for $50 million. Lucien's expression didn't change. Did you take it? She already transferred the money. That's not what I asked. Evelyn looked at him. At the man who'd given her a job when she was nobody. Who'd taught her how to survive in a world that ate people like her alive. Who'd stood beside her when she planned revenge and told her the truth when she needed to hear it. I took the money, she said. But I didn't stay for the ending. I left Damien signing his life away and came here instead. Why? Because you were right, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. About everything. About revenge. About ego. About how I needed him to see my face more than I needed justice. You were right, and I was too angry to listen. Lucien set down his duffel bag. I shouldn't have walked out. Yes, you should have. I was spiraling. I was going to get myself killed. Maybe. But I still shouldn't have left you alone. You gave me a choice, Evelyn said. Come with you or keep fighting. That was fair. Fair doesn't mean right. They stood there in the empty gate area, surrounded by the distant hum of announcements and the mechanical whir of jets taxiing outside the windows. Two people who'd built something fragile and then watched it crack under the weight of decisions neither of them could take back. What happens now? Evelyn asked. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, That depends on what you want. I don't know what I want. Yes, you do. You're just scared to say it. Evelyn took a breath. I want to stop running. I want to stop looking over my shoulder waiting for the past to catch up. I want to wake up one morning and not feel like I'm still standing in that ballroom watching my life get erased in front of everyone who mattered. Then we make that happen. How? Lucien picked up his bag and gestured toward the exit. We leave. Not just the city, the whole coast. We find a place no one knows us. We build something new. And we let Damien and Celeste and all of this rot in the rearview mirror. Evelyn wanted to believe it was that simple. Wanted to believe that walking away was enough to erase 4 years of obsession and pain. But she knew better. There's something I need to do first, she said. They rented a car and drove north along the coast as the sun dropped toward the horizon. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat with her phone in her lap, staring at a contact she hadn't called in 4 years. Marcus Hale, Damien's former lead counsel, the lawyer who'd resigned and fled to London when he realized the empire he'd been defending was built on fraud. She'd spent years blaming Marcus for enabling Damien, for writing the legal paperwork that buried crimes under corporate structures, for being the architect of legitimacy that made theft look like business. But Marcus had also been the one who walked away when he saw the truth. That took something. Not courage exactly, but something close. She dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a voice answered, British accent, cautious. Hello? Marcus, it's Vivienne Mercer. There was a long pause. Then, I heard you came back. I saw the news coverage from the gala. I need to ask you something. I don't work for Damien anymore. Shit. I know. That's why I'm calling. You left because you saw something. Something that scared you enough to abandon a client you'd represented for a decade. I need to know what it was. Another pause, longer this time. Then Marcus said, Are you recording this? No. Are you working with investigators? No, I just need the truth. She heard him sigh on the other end of the line. The sound of someone deciding whether to unburden himself or keep carrying weight he'd been hauling for too long. There was a young woman, Marcus said finally. Journalist, investigating Ashcroft Industries. She'd uncovered evidence of money laundering through shell corporations in Singapore. Real evidence, the kind that would have ended him. Evelyn's chest tightened. What happened to her? She disappeared. 2 days after she contacted Damien's office requesting an interview. Her apartment was cleared out. Her phone went dead. And the investigation she'd been working on vanished with her. Did Damien? I don't know, Marcus interrupted, and I didn't want to know. Because the morning after she disappeared, Damien called me into his office and told me to make sure no one ever found the paperwork she'd been looking at. And when I asked what happened to her, he smiled and said she'd decided journalism wasn't for her. Evelyn felt bile rise in her throat. You think he killed her? I think powerful men don't let threats survive, Marcus said quietly. And I think I spent 10 years convincing myself that defending him was just business. That I was protecting corporate interests, not covering up crimes. But when that woman disappeared, I realized I'd been lying to myself. So you ran. So I left. And I've spent the last year trying to figure out if there's a difference. Evelyn closed her eyes. What was her name? Sarah Chen. 26 years old, Yale graduate, had her whole life ahead of her. The name landed like a stone dropping into dark water. Sarah Chen. A woman Evelyn had never met. A woman who'd been erased the same way Evelyn had been erased, except permanently. Thank you for telling me, Evelyn said. What are you going to do with this information? Marcus asked. I don't know yet, but I needed to hear it. She hung up before he could ask anything else. Lucian glanced over from the driver's seat. What was that about? Evelyn told him. About Sarah Chen. About the journalist who'd disappeared. About the implication that Damien Ashcroft wasn't just a thief. He might be a murderer. When she finished, Lucienne was quiet for a long time. The highway stretched out ahead of them, empty and endless. That changes things, he said finally. How? Because if what Marcus said is true, Damien doesn't get to walk away. Not with a signed document and an empty bank account. He gets investigated, prosecuted, held accountable. We don't have proof. No, but we have a name, and names lead to evidence. Evelyn stared out the window at the ocean rolling past in the fading light. If we do this, it never ends. We'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, testifying, reliving every piece of this. Maybe, Lucienne agreed, or maybe we do the right thing and let the legal system handle what we couldn't. The legal system didn't care when I tried to expose him. That was before a missing journalist entered the equation. Evelyn thought about Sarah Chen, 26 years old, a whole life ahead of her, erased because she'd gotten too close to the truth. She thought about herself. 11 years married to a man who'd discarded her in public, 4 years spent planning revenge, a penthouse confrontation that ended with $50 million and no sense of closure. And she realized something. This wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. Pull over, she said. Lucian slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder. The ocean stretched out to their left, dark and restless. The sun was almost gone now, just a sliver of gold on the horizon. Evelyn got out of the car and walked toward the edge of the cliff, where the land dropped away into nothing. She could hear the waves crashing against rocks below, could feel the wind pulling at her clothes like it wanted to drag her over the edge. Lucian came up beside her and stood quietly, waiting. I spent 4 years planning to destroy Damien, Evelyn said. I memorized his empire. I tracked his accounts. I built evidence. And when I finally confronted him, it didn't matter, because someone smarter had already beaten me to it. Celeste. Celeste, Evelyn agreed, and now she's walking away with everything while Damien signs away his life, and I'm standing here with blood money wondering what any of it was for. It was for survival, Lucienne said. You did what you needed to do to rebuild yourself. No, I did what I needed to do to feel powerful again, but power built on revenge just makes you hollow. She turned to face him. Sarah Chen didn't get a chance to rebuild. She didn't get 4 years in a harbor town. She didn't get a second identity or a man who taught her how to survive. She got erased, permanently. And I'm the only person besides Marcus who knows her name. So we make sure people remember, Lucian said. How? We call the investigators. We tell them about Sarah Chen, we give them Marcus's contact information, and we let them dig up the truth. And if they don't find anything, then at least we tried. Evelyn looked out at the ocean, at the water that went on forever, at the place where the sky met the sea and everything became undefined. If we do this, she said, we can't walk away. We become witnesses. We get subpoenaed. We spend years in courtrooms reliving every piece of this. I know. You're okay with that? Lucian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I spent the first half of my life building things that hurt people. I told you that. And I've spent the second half trying to build things that don't. This is part of that. Even if it costs us everything, everything we have is already built on compromises, Lucian said. Maybe it's time we built something on the truth instead. Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes. Not from grief, from something closer to relief. The kind of relief that came from finally understanding that revenge was never going to heal her, but truth might. Okay, she said. Let's call them. They made the call from a rest stop 30 miles up the coast. Lucien had contacts, lawyers, investigators, people who knew how to navigate systems designed to protect men like Damien. Within an hour, they had a conference call scheduled with a federal prosecutor named Catherine Voss, who specialized in white-collar crime and had been trying to build a case against Ashcroft Industries for years. Catherine listened to their story without interrupting. When they finished, she asked them to repeat everything about Sarah Chen. Then she asked if they were willing to testify. Yes, Evelyn said before she could second-guess herself. You understand what that means? Catherine asked. Your identity becomes public record. Your connection to Damien Ashcroft becomes evidence. Your credibility gets questioned. Defense attorneys will tear apart every decision you've made for the last 4 years. I understand. And you're still willing? Evelyn looked at Lucian. He nodded once. Yes, she said. I'm willing. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll start the investigation tomorrow. If what you're telling me is accurate, this could take months, maybe years. Are you prepared for that? We don't have a choice, Evelyn replied. Sarah Chen didn't have a choice. The least I can do is make sure her name doesn't get buried the way mine almost was. All right, Catherine said. I'll be in touch. The call ended. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat of the car with her phone in her lap, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her like a second skin. We just declared war, she said quietly. No, Lucien replied. We just chose a side. They drove through the night and into the next day, following the coast north until the cities gave way to small towns, and the small towns gave way to stretches of empty highway bordered by forests that looked like they'd never seen civilization. Somewhere around midnight, Lucien pulled off the highway and parked in front of a motel that looked like it had been abandoned and then reluctantly reopened. The sign out front said vacancy in letters that flickered like dying stars. They checked in. The room smelled like old carpet and industrial cleaner. 2 beds, a bathroom with tiles that had seen better decades, a window that looked out at the parking lot and nothing beyond. Evelyn sat on the edge of one bed and stared at the wall. Lucien sat on the other and pulled out his laptop. What are you doing? She asked. Damage control, he replied. If we're going to be witnesses in a federal investigation, we need to make sure our own operations are clean. No outstanding warrants, no questionable transactions, nothing that gives defense attorneys ammunition. How long will that take? A week, maybe 2. Evelyn nodded. She felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. It was the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying weight for so long you forgot it was there until someone finally told you it was okay to set it down. I'm sorry, she said. Lucien looked up from the laptop. For what? For dragging you into this. For making you part of something that's going to follow us for years. You didn't drag me anywhere, Lucien said. I chose this. Same way you chose to get in that cab and come to the airport. Why did you get off the plane? Lucien closed the laptop and set it aside. Because I realized something while I was sitting there waiting for takeoff. I realized that I've spent my entire life walking away from things that mattered because staying was too hard. And I didn't want to do that again. Not with you. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. I don't know if I'm worth that. Neither do I, Lucien said, and there was no cruelty in it, just honesty. But I'm willing to find out. She crossed the space between the beds and sat down next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. What if this doesn't work? She asked. What if we give them everything and Damien still walks away? Then at least we tried. And at least Sarah Chen's name gets spoken out loud instead of buried in a file somewhere. Is that enough? I don't know, Lucien admitted. But it's more than we had yesterday. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't pull away, didn't try to fix anything, just sat there with her in a motel room that smelled like regret and cleaning chemicals. letting the silence speak for both of them. "I'm tired," she said finally. "I know, not just physically. I'm tired of being angry, tired of carrying this." "Then put it down." "I don't know how." "You start," Lucian said, "by letting other people carry it for a while." The investigation took 8 months. Catherine Voss and her team tore through Ashcroft Industries with the kind of methodical precision that turned corporate empires into evidence exhibits. They found the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the fraudulent partnerships, and they found Sarah Chen, or rather they found what was left of her story. Bank records showing her last transactions, security footage from her apartment building showing 2 men entering her unit the night she disappeared, phone records linking those men to a security firm contracted by Ashcroft Industries. It wasn't a body, but it was enough. Damien Ashcroft was indicted on charges of conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The murder charge couldn't stick without physical evidence, but the rest was airtight. Celeste Laurent was indicted too. Turns out moving $50 million in stolen assets made you an accomplice even if you claimed you were a victim. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Evelyn testified on day 12. She sat in the witness box and told the jury everything. About her marriage, about the offshore accounts she'd helped create, about the night Damien had replaced her in front of 300 people, about the 4 years she'd spent planning revenge that turned into something bigger than personal vendetta. Defense attorneys tried to paint her as unstable, obsessed, a woman scorned who couldn't accept that her husband had moved on. But Catherine Voss had prepared her well. "Ms. Vale," Catherine asked during direct examination, "do you consider yourself a victim in this case?" "No," Evelyn replied. "Why not?" "Because I helped build the system Damien used to commit fraud. I knew what we were doing was illegal. I did it anyway because I believed in the empire we were building together. That doesn't make me a victim. That makes me complicit. And yet you're testifying against him now. Because being complicit in the past doesn't mean I have to be silent in the present. Sarah Chen didn't get a chance to testify. I do, so I'm using it." The jury deliberated for 3 days. Guilty on all counts, Damien Ashcroft was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Celeste Laurent got 12. When the verdict was read, Evelyn wasn't in the courtroom. She was standing outside on the courthouse steps with Lucien, watching the sun break through the clouds for the first time in weeks. "It's over," Lucien said. "No," Evelyn replied. "It's finished. There's a difference." They moved to a town on the Oregon coast that didn't have a name anyone remembered, the kind of place people drove through on the way to somewhere better. Faded paint, weathered docks, a bar that doubled as a general store because the owner couldn't afford to run 2 businesses. They bought a house on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Small. 2 bedrooms, a porch that wrapped around the front, windows that let in more light than seemed possible. Lucien dismantled the darker parts of his network piece by piece. Shut down the operations that crossed lines he could no longer justify crossing. Paid restitution to people who'd been hurt by decisions he'd made years ago when survival mattered more than morality. It cost him everything: his reputation, his connections, his ability to operate in the world he'd built. But it also gave him something back: the ability to sleep without wondering who would come for him in the night. Evelyn started writing. Not a memoir, not an exposé, just stories. Fiction built on truth. Characters who made terrible choices and lived with consequences that couldn't be undone. She published under a pseudonym. The books didn't sell well, but they were honest in ways that nothing else in her life had ever been. And that was enough. 1 year after the trial ended, Evelyn received a letter from Marcus Hale. It was short. 3 paragraphs apologizing for his complicity, for enabling Damien, for walking away when he should have stayed and fought. The last paragraph said, "Sarah Chen's mother asked me to thank you. She said knowing her daughter's name was spoken in court gave her something she thought she'd never have, proof that Sarah mattered. Thank you for that." Evelyn read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in a drawer where she kept things that mattered but hurt to look at. She never responded. Some apologies weren't meant to be accepted. They were just meant to be witnessed. On a morning 3 years after she'd walked out of that ballroom with a black suitcase and the ruins of her life, Evelyn stood on the porch of the house she now shared with Lucien, watching the sun spill gold across the ocean. The rage that had kept her alive for 4 years was gone. Not erased, just finished. She'd carried it as far as it could take her, and then she'd set it down. Lucien walked out carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked older now, gray at the temples. Lines around his eyes that made him look like he'd spent years squinting at something far away. He handed her one of the cups and stood beside her, both of them watching the water move in ways that would never stop. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Evelyn thought about the question, about what okay meant, about whether healing was something you achieved or something you practiced. "Yes," she said, "I think I finally am." And for the first time since the night she'd walked out of that ballroom carrying nothing but a suitcase and the certainty that her life was over, she meant it. She wasn't the woman Damien had humiliated. She wasn't the woman who'd spent 4 years planning revenge. She wasn't even the woman who'd stood in a penthouse and watched empires collapse. She was just Evelyn, a woman who'd survived, who'd made terrible choices and lived with them, who'd learned that justice wasn't the same as revenge, and healing wasn't the same as forgetting. A woman who'd finally figured out that the opposite of being erased wasn't being remembered. It was being present, here, now, in this moment, on this porch, with this man. Watching this ocean that didn't care about empires or vengeance or any of the things human beings spent their lives destroying each other over. Lucien's hand found hers. She laced her fingers through his. "What do you want to do today?" he asked. Evelyn smiled. Not the practiced smile she'd worn in ballrooms, not the cold smile she'd given Damien in the penthouse, just a small, real smile that belonged entirely to her. "Nothing," she said. "Absolutely nothing." And they stood there together as the sun climbed higher and the ocean kept moving and the world continued turning without needing anything from them at all. Because sometimes the greatest victory wasn't destroying the people who hurt you. It was learning how to live without needing to. And that, finally, impossibly, was exactly what she'd done.